I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event.
Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did something far more devastating. She placed a folder on the table, looked directly across the room, and stated exactly what Meghan had been trying to secure: a pathway for members of her private circle to claim access, recognition, and influence through Commonwealth-linked royal privileges. The room fell silent because Anne was not challenging a rumor. She was exposing a plan with names, correspondence, and a paper trail. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne had been called into a controlled royal review after palace officials uncovered messages referring to Commonwealth patronage, ceremonial access, and informal representative status for people connected to Meghan. A royal patronage is an official relationship in which a member of the royal family lends support to an organization, and that distinction mattered because these communications appeared to blur private friendship with institutional backing. She knew the question was no longer whether contacts existed. It was whether those contacts were being turned into authority. Charles opened the dossier and read without speaking. The dossier, a compiled file of documents and evidence prepared for review, showed Meghan's attempt to create Commonwealth-linked rights and privileges for selected members of her circle, without direct palace approval. Those benefits included introductions, invitations to events, advisory access, and recognition through royal associated networks. The king's face changed as he reached the section explaining how those privileges might be presented to outside organizations. Anne watched him closely, sensing that he understood the danger clearly. Meghan reacted with disbelief when she learned through a documented palace briefing that Anne had obtained the correspondence. She insisted the initiative had been designed to build cultural bridges, not to create a rival power base. Her anger sharpened when she realized the review extended beyond her role. Several people around her had been listed for introductions under language suggesting that their connection to her could carry continuing royal weight. Anne then slid one page across the table and pressed a finger against a paragraph Charles had not yet reached. He removed his glasses, read it once, then again, and set them down without a word. That silence carried more force than any accusation. The page did not merely describe outreach. It identified a person who was expected to approach a royal office on behalf of the network. Anne felt the matter change in that instant. The name was troubling, but the office attached to it was worse. And when she traced that connection back through the palace, the confrontation stopped being about paperwork and became painfully personal. To understand why Anne reacted so fiercely, one thing has to be understood. This was not merely a disagreement over invitations or charitable work. It touched the question the Princess Royal had guarded for decades: who has the right to speak with the authority of the crown? Meghan saw opportunity, independence, and global relevance. Anne saw boundaries being tested, and between those two interpretations stood Charles, forced to decide whether intention mattered more than constitutional discipline. Anne had spent decades treating royal duty as something borrowed, never owned. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, had built her reputation around service without personal possession of the influence that came with it. To her, royal access existed because the sovereign granted it for specific responsibilities. It could not simply pass from one person to another through friendship, loyalty, or private association. That belief was exactly why Meghan's proposal struck such a deep nerve. Meghan saw the same issue from the opposite direction. During her years as a working royal, she had formed relationships with activists, entrepreneurs, community leaders, and people across the Commonwealth who believed in the causes she supported. The Commonwealth itself is a voluntary association of nations, many of which share historical ties with Britain, and those relationships had never felt temporary to her. In a private conversation with Harry, she admitted that Anne's interpretation felt deliberately severe. She told him the Princess Royal seemed determined to treat every independent move as another act of rebellion. Harry listened, then reminded her that once the palace believed authority was being blurred, emotion would not stop the response. Anne felt wounded for another reason. She believed years of service were being reduced to something close to personal branding. When a senior aide quietly suggested the matter could be contained without a formal confrontation, she refused. Quiet solutions, she warned, were how unclear boundaries became permanent precedents. The word precedent mattered because one tolerated exception could later be used to justify another. For her, this was no longer about Meghan alone. It was about what anyone connected to the family might claim in the future. Charles soon received a deeper summary of the proposed network. The king learned that several people listed around Meghan had never held any official Commonwealth mandate, meaning they had no formal authorization to represent royal or institutional interests. Their strongest connection appeared to run through her personally. That discovery troubled him because private influence was beginning to resemble inherited access. Charles stood alone with the dossier open when William entered. The prince studied his father's face before asking one question: how far did it get? The king closed the file before answering. That small gesture told William enough. And the answer led them backward to one private gathering months earlier, where an ambitious idea had quietly become something far more dangerous. The crisis did not begin inside Buckingham Palace. It began months earlier, at a private dinner where no crowns were present, no court circular was issued, and almost nobody understood the significance of what was being discussed. Meghan spoke about building a modern Commonwealth network faster, younger, less constrained by palace bureaucracy. At first, it sounded ambitious rather than dangerous. Then one guest asked whether members of the group could be introduced under continuing royal association. That question changed everything. Meghan had never stopped caring about Commonwealth-facing causes. She remained especially drawn to projects involving women, youth leadership, media, and social enterprise, believing those relationships still carried meaning after her official royal duties ended. A court circular is the formal public record of royal engagements, and none of this appeared there because the dinner was private. That difference mattered. Several people around her believed private connections could continue freely, as long as nobody claimed to represent the sovereign. To them, that seemed like a reasonable line. To the palace, it would later look dangerously thin. Meghan listened carefully as one participant proposed a more organized structure. The idea was simple on paper. Create a list of Commonwealth liaison partners who could receive introductions through relationships she had already built. A liaison partner, in plain terms, would be someone used to connect people or organizations across different groups. She authorized her team to explore the concept further. In that instant, an informal discussion became a working plan. Meghan saw the choice as practical rather than provocative. She had grown frustrated by what she considered palace gatekeeping, especially when relationships formed through years of public work seemed to disappear the moment official duties ended. She believed human connections should not expire simply because institutional roles changed. Her team accepted that reasoning and moved forward, convinced they were building continuity rather than claiming authority. Anne discovered the dinner months later through written correspondence attached to the wider proposal. She did not react most strongly to Meghan's ambition. What disturbed her was the assumption beneath it that relationships created under royal authority could somehow be carried into private hands and then extended outward. Anne sat alone with the dinner summary and read one line twice, continuing access through established Sussex Commonwealth connections. She removed her reading glasses, placed them beside the page, and stared at the sentence again. The wording was no longer theoretical. Anne then found something worse. A request using that language had actually been sent. Someone inside the wider royal network had answered it. What began as an ambitious conversation had crossed into action, and Anne now wanted to know who had opened the first door. When Meghan finally entered the room with Anne, there were no advisors seated between them, and no cameras to soften what followed. The Princess Royal had the correspondence in front of her. Meghan had already seen enough to know what Anne believed it proved. Neither woman came to apologize. One believed she was defending the crown from unauthorized influence. The other believed she was being punished for refusing to surrender relationships she had helped build. The confrontation was inevitable. Charles had approved the private discussion before any formal palace decision was made. He hoped one direct conversation might prevent another family fracture from widening. A formal palace decision, in simple terms, would be an official ruling carrying the authority of the monarch rather than a personal family agreement. Anne entered with one purpose: determine whether Meghan had knowingly allowed her associates to claim standing they could not have secured on their own. She was not interested in motives anymore. She wanted a clear answer. Anne leaned forward and asked the question without softening it. Did you authorize these people to approach Commonwealth organizations using your former royal connections? Meghan paused. Then she answered carefully. She had authorized introductions, she said, not royal representation. Anne immediately challenged the distinction. To her, an introduction made under the weight of former royal status could still create the impression of official approval. Meghan pushed back hard. She accused Anne of deliberately confusing access with authority and insisted that relationships were human, not palace property. She had spoken with people, supported causes, built trust, and she refused to accept that those bonds simply disappeared. Anne answered with equal force. Private relationships, she said, became constitutional problems the moment royal status was used to open doors that remained closed to everyone else. Anne then placed an email between them. The message asked whether one member of Meghan's circle could be described as connected to a Sussex Commonwealth initiative. Meghan's expression changed immediately. She recognized the project, but not the wording. In a documented account of the meeting, she insisted she had never approved that description and had never authorized anyone to imply formal standing. Meghan now understood the danger. People around her had taken an idea she considered informal and stretched it into something larger. Anne understood that too, but she refused to separate the outcome from the person who had authorized the network in the first place. Responsibility, she argued, did not disappear simply because others had gone further than expected. Anne rose before the discussion could turn in circles. She then disclosed, through the written review Charles had commissioned, that William was already tracing every Commonwealth-facing contact linked to the proposal. One response, she said, had come from surprisingly high inside the system. The argument had exposed the emotional fault line, but the real decision would now belong to those who controlled the Crown's authority. The most consequential conversation did not involve Meghan or Anne. It happened when Charles and William sat with the same documents and confronted a question neither could avoid. Could someone outside the working monarchy still use relationships created through royal service to build influence around a private circle? Charles saw a family wound that could deepen. William saw a precedent that could survive them all. Their disagreement was not about whether Meghan mattered. It was about where royal authority ended. Charles knew the final responsibility rested with him. As sovereign, the king holds the authority to decide who may formally represent the crown and who may use royal-linked institutional relationships. That mattered because uncertainty could allow private figures to appear officially connected even when no approval existed. William understood the same danger. He had no desire to humiliate Meghan publicly, but he feared that silence would create a model others could copy. Charles read the documents again and admitted what troubled him most. Any severe response, he told William, would be seen by Harry and Meghan as another rejection from the family. The monarch had learned that even technical decisions now carried emotional consequences. He did not want a constitutional boundary to become another personal wound. Yet he also knew that avoiding the issue would leave Commonwealth organizations guessing about who truly carried royal authority. William answered carefully. The prince told his father that doing nothing was also a decision, and one with consequences beyond the family. If private foundations, former working royals, or personal associates could use royal connections without clear limits, organizations might begin receiving conflicting messages. One group could believe an introduction carried palace approval, while another understood it as purely personal. That confusion, he argued, could damage the very relationships everyone claimed to protect. Charles unfolded Meghan's written explanation and read it once more. Her statement, submitted through a documented palace exchange, insisted that she had intended introductions and cooperation, not official representation. The king folded the page slowly, rather than pushing it aside. He admitted he believed she may not have intended the broadest version of what followed. But intent, he said, could not erase what others had attempted in her name. William then proposed the rule that changed everything. No former working royal, family member, private foundation, or associate could extend Commonwealth-facing royal access to third parties without sovereign authorization. Sovereign authorization simply meant direct approval from the monarch before royal authority could be used on someone else's behalf. Charles agreed in principle. He believed the rule could close the loophole quietly and protect the family from further damage. Then Anne made one additional demand. The king wanted discretion. Anne believed discretion would leave just enough uncertainty for the same battle to return. The decision arrived without ceremony. No public confrontation. No dramatic proclamation. Just a formal instruction that instantly changed what Meghan and her associates could do. Commonwealth-related introductions connected to royal standing were frozen. Organizations contacted through the disputed network were told that no private individual carried authorization from the Crown. For Anne, the line had finally been restored. For Meghan, the message felt brutally different. The relationships she believed she had earned were now being defined as something she had merely borrowed. Charles approved the directive after reviewing William's proposal and Anne's objections. A palace directive is a formal instruction issued under royal authority, and this one made the boundary unmistakable. Commonwealth-facing privileges, introductions, patronage channels, or representative descriptions could not be extended to private associates without explicit permission. The king deliberately framed the rule broadly, rather than naming Meghan. Even so, nobody inside the family misunderstood what had forced the decision. The wording may have been neutral, but the emotional impact was not. Meghan received the notice while sitting with Harry. She read the opening paragraph once, then again, as if the language might soften the second time. It did not. She placed the page down and said quietly that Anne had turned a disagreement over relationships into a judgment on her entire royal past. Harry's anger came quickly. He believed institutional language had once again been used to settle something that should have remained a family conversation, and he hated how easily personal pain could disappear behind official wording. Meghan soon learned the consequences were already moving faster than the debate. Several planned introductions had been cancelled. One member of her circle was told directly that they could not use any wording suggesting Commonwealth standing through the Sussex connection. She understood then that this was no warning. The network had been stopped before it could expand further. Anne, however, did not feel victorious. Through a documented palace briefing, she learned that one Commonwealth-linked organization had already assumed the earlier approach, carried informal royal approval. That detail confirmed her deepest concern. The issue had never been merely about friendships. Someone outside the palace had already mistaken private association for crown authority. To Anne, the restriction had arrived just in time. Meghan sat with the notice long after Harry stopped speaking. Her anger remained, but something beneath it had changed. She no longer wanted another message carried through Charles, William, or an aide. She wanted the argument stripped of official language and family intermediaries. Meghan asked for one private meeting. Not with the king, not with William, with Anne. After days of anger conducted through documents and intermediaries, the two women would finally speak with no one else in the room. This time there were no files between them. Meghan asked Anne for one conversation without secretaries, private aides, lawyers, or family members. What followed did not erase the dispute, but it changed its meaning. Meghan admitted that part of her determination came from something deeper than strategy. She could not accept that leaving royal duty meant every relationship built during those years now belonged exclusively to the institution. Anne listened without interruption. Then she explained why that belief frightened her. Meghan had requested the meeting because she wanted Anne to hear the motive behind the initiative, not simply judge it by the strongest language used in emails and proposals. Anne agreed, because the formal decision had already been made, meaning the argument was no longer about negotiation or leverage. There was nothing left to win. That mattered. For the first time, both women could speak without wondering whether every sentence might change an official ruling. Meghan spoke first. She told Anne that leaving royal duty had felt like more than stepping away from ceremonies and formal responsibilities. It had felt, at times, like being erased from relationships she had spent years building. People she had spoken with, causes she had supported, and communities she had connected with suddenly seemed to be treated as part of an institution rather than part of her own history. Her voice stayed controlled, but the frustration underneath it was impossible to miss. Anne answered without anger. She admitted that royal duty often demanded exactly that kind of surrender. The monarchy, she said, survives because individuals do not personally inherit the authority attached to the roles they once held. That sacrifice could feel harsh, even deeply unfair, but royal influence could not become private property simply because someone had helped create relationships while serving the crown. To Anne, That distinction protected everyone, including those outside the palace. Meghan then acknowledged something she had resisted saying before. She should have stopped members of her circle from using language that implied continuing royal standing. She accepted that the wording had crossed a line, but she refused to apologize for maintaining genuine private relationships across Commonwealth countries. Those connections, she insisted, belonged to human beings, not institutions. Anne surprised her by agreeing. Anne explained that private relationships had never been the problem. The problem began when those relationships were converted into access for third parties, people who could then appear to carry influence they had never been granted. Meghan finally understood the exact boundary Anne had been defending. The bitterness between them did not disappear, but it narrowed into something clear. And just as that private understanding created the foundation for a final settlement, the story escaped the palace and exploded into public view. By the next morning, what had been a private royal dispute was no longer private. The story raced across television panels, newspaper sites, and social media feeds. Princess Anne had challenged an attempt by Meghan's circle to gain Commonwealth-linked access. Supporters called it a necessary defense of royal boundaries. Critics called it institutional possessiveness. But one image captured the entire conflict: a newspaper front page showing Anne beside a bold headline about the crown closing the Commonwealth door. Meghan watched the coverage turn a complicated dispute into a single explosive word: rights. That framing frustrated her because it suggested she had tried to claim formal powers rather than preserve relationships she believed were personal. The Commonwealth, a voluntary association of independent countries with historic links to Britain, suddenly became the center of a debate far larger than the original proposal. Her explanation about friendships and private networks appeared in some reports, but the sharper interpretation traveled faster. Anne faced a different kind of anger. She saw commentators describe her intervention as a personal attack, reducing questions about authority to another royal feud. She refused to answer publicly. Yet when one broadcaster framed the dispute as a battle between two strong-willed women, someone close to the family noticed her jaw tighten. Anne had never believed the issue was about personality. To her, it was about whether royal connections could be turned into private influence without clear permission. Palace officials then issued a restrained clarification. Only the sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch, could authorize someone to represent the crown or receive privileged access through official royal relationships. The statement did not name Meghan. It did not praise Anne. But the meaning was unmistakable, and that clarity mattered, because several Commonwealth organizations had been unsure how to interpret approaches connected to former royal relationships. Crowds outside Buckingham Palace soon became part of the story. Visitors beneath the palace gates were photographed holding a morning paper carrying Anne's portrait above the headline, "Anne draws the line." That single front page appeared repeatedly on evening broadcasts, turning a private disagreement into a global symbol of royal authority confronting personal independence. Meghan saw the image and felt the sting immediately. Anne saw it too, and disliked the sense of victory attached to her face. Neither woman felt accurately represented by the spectacle surrounding them. One believed her motives had been exaggerated. The other believed her duty had been turned into drama. Commonwealth organizations quietly welcomed the palace clarification, because uncertainty had finally been removed. But inside the family, Charles understood that a rule alone would not heal the damage. The headlines had turned a family disagreement into a global controversy, and the king's final ruling would determine whether it ended as humiliation or as a boundary everyone could finally understand. Charles's final ruling was neither the victory Anne's supporters expected, nor the defeat Meghan's critics demanded. It was something more precise. Meghan would remain free to maintain private relationships, support causes, and build independent networks across Commonwealth countries. But neither she nor anyone around her could convert former royal connections into privileged access, representative status, or authority for third parties. The distinction was permanent. Anne had won the institutional argument. Meghan had forced the palace to define exactly where private freedom began. Charles signed a final written framework separating private relationships from crown-authorized rights. The framework, in simple terms, was an official set of rules explaining what former working royals could and could not do with connections created through royal service. The king made the boundary unmistakable. Private friendships could continue, causes could be supported, independent work could grow, but royal introductions, ceremonial standing, representative authority, and Commonwealth-linked privileges could not be handed to associates without direct approval from the sovereign. Meghan accepted the boundary and withdrew the disputed structure. She instructed her circle to remove any language that could suggest continuing royal or Commonwealth standing. The decision bruised her pride, but it also forced a realization she could no longer avoid. What she considered personal influence could look very different to an outside organization. A friendship might feel private to her, yet the weight of her former position could make that same contact appear official. Anne felt no sense of victory. She returned to the original dossier after Charles signed the framework, closed it carefully, and placed it away. The confrontation had achieved what she wanted, but the cost remained personal. She had defended a principle by challenging someone within her own family circle, and that was never something she treated lightly. For her, protecting the monarchy had once again meant accepting discomfort rather than avoiding it. Charles met with Anne one final time afterward. The king told her the matter was finished. She asked whether Meghan understood the ruling. He answered that she did. Anne gave a single nod and accepted that no further punishment was necessary. The boundary had been drawn. That was enough. The crisis had settled one question completely. Royal influence could not be privately inherited, loaned, or distributed simply because someone once held a place inside the institution. Relationships could survive royal service. Constitutional authority could not. And that was the true consequence of Anne's intervention. Meghan kept her voice, her causes, and her relationships, while the crown kept control of its authority. Charles prevented a family disagreement from becoming a permanent fracture by defining a rule instead of imposing personal humiliation. The dispute ended with bruised feelings, clearer boundaries, and one unmistakable verdict: the Commonwealth could inspire private work, but its royal authority would remain with the crown alone. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.